The Underground Nexus, how to get started with it quickly. So what is the Underground Nexus? That's the first question of the day that we should be asking ourselves. The Underground Nexus is this terrifying thing right here. Let's take a look at it. It's basically a software factory, and if you've ever heard of cloud native before, if you were to Google what is a software factory or cloud native software factory pipeline, then you will find a white paper from Cloud Native on what all of this is. But ultimately, it's a way to use the cloud for producing and developing your software for whatever you're trying to host or run your company with. So if you were to go over to cloudunderground.dev is our website, you'll notice that there is this Underground Nexus drop-down option, and the source code for the Underground Nexus doesn't cost anything. And if I take a high-level look at what is the Underground Nexus, it's more or less what this says right here. It is a copy-paste data center and software factory. So, Jermaine, what would you describe the Underground Nexus as, considering it's sort of a strange thing?
Um, I mean, it's it's a lot of things for everybody, right? Like it depends on what you want to do. For me, it started off as a great way to home lab, especially when I just had like the Raspberry Pi to play with, and I was really just using two Raspberry Pis. It was a great way to play around, K8s, everything. And now that I have a server I can play with, it's a lot more. So um, I think it just depends on everybody, every the individual.
That's a good way to put it. And so the Underground Nexus, because it's more or less the idea of like a data center. What's a data center? Well, a data center could be used for hosting web apps or AI things, or like online cloud gaming environments. Who knows what? A data center can be a lot of things or do a lot of things. And so, really, it kind of comes down to, do you have a use case, or what do you need as an individual? The Underground Nexus, it's no different from if you have a laptop. What can you do with a laptop? Well, you can do a lot of things with it. You can photo edit, you can make videos, you can code, you can game. It's a laptop. And so, Underground Nexus, it's a data center that lives inside of a container. Basically, it is what is called a hyper converged data center. So it is something that is free to use, and the only things that actually cost anything are if you are a business owner and you need labor, and the labor isn't particularly cheap, but the code is open source, so you can use this right now, however you want, whenever you want. You can build other little products and things. You can make other versions of products that you want. Anyways, if we take a little look at some of the things that you'll notice when you're taking a look at the Underground Nexus, is that it has a number of different features. All of the features come down to the items that are installed in the stack, which include GitKraken, Visual Studio Code. It has emulation built right into it using QEMU, a security operations center that's powered by Pi-hole, uses Portainer for general environmental management and access. And basically, there's something called the CyberLife Torpedo, which is an S3 bucket compatible resource for basically making sure that you can manage your storage. You can turn any computer into a NAS, more or less. You've probably noticed some of these diagrams going by. If you check out our website, feel free to spend some time taking a look at some of the things we've created. One of the things that makes this solution unique is something called a Git BIOS. As this diagram here shows, a copy-paste data center is a complicated concept, because a server in general, how could you just copy-paste not just a server, but copy-paste a whole bunch of servers, right? So the Underground Nexus is designed to unify different locations around the world and make them one giant data center network environment. So for those who develop in cloud, it makes it so that everyone who's a developer basically runs a fragment of the cloud and is a part of the data center. And because we build everything in what's called Git, for those of you who are familiar with like GitHub, GitLab, and everything is built with code first, it does make our infrastructure very portable and very scalable, because even though it's hard to move a VM, it's a lot easier to move some lines of code that basically process things as software. And we're going to take a look at how to start doing all of these things. And also, when you first download the Underground Nexus, take a look at this, you'll get to have all the resources you need to start learning DevSecOps. With the first use case that we have built right into it is Hackasat lab environment for learning how to hack satellites. Jermaine, have you decided that you are going to go hack some satellites anytime soon?
Not yet. I think I'm gonna stay away from that for just a little bit. I'm a little bit more on the development side right now, but I do see the interest in it. Like I see Randall, I see his posts. Like my goodness.
Ah, yes, all of that space technology. So one of the things that, if anyone's been following us for a while, as we talk about space and satellites and things like that, it's because we did actually build infrastructure for people who do things like engineer satellites, and things like satellites have to get the satellites have software. It has to be developed, and it has to be developed securely. And so we do this in the form of what's called DevSecOps. And so we do focus on DevSecOps. And if we want to know how to start using this tool, it does recommend using Docker Desktop. If we take a look at Docker Desktop, then you can install Docker Desktop for Windows basically from Docker's website. You can Google it. But if you are taking a look at the Underground Nexus anyways, the link is right here, so you don't really have to go search for it. Docker Desktop, it's not just for Windows, it's also for Mac, and it will work with the Apple chips. It is also something that will work on Linux as well. So if you are not someone who has something that's going to run Docker Desktop, or a system that you generally use, some folks these days tend to just use iPads for things, and you want to have a reliable server anyways that can still run Docker, you can get a Raspberry Pi. If you do use Raspberry Pi, use Raspberry Pi OS. I strongly recommend using the latest version of Raspberry Pi OS, or it might not actually work, and you might go through these steps and it's just not going to work. And if you do use Raspberry Pi OS, you need to install Docker. And Docker's website has guidance on how to install Docker for more than just Windows. It has installations for Linux as well. So it has all kinds of guidance on Docker's website. So I'll let all of you decide, what platform do you have available to you? Use the platform that you prefer, because that's the joy of the Underground Nexus. It also will work in anything from like AWS to Azure to DigitalOcean, Linode, Civo, any of these public cloud environments. If it runs Kubernetes or Docker, especially if it runs Docker, if you can run Docker in an environment, then you can run the Underground Nexus. So without further ado, I'm going to show you how hard or easy. If you think this looks hard, tell me, but hopefully it doesn't look too hard. It should be one of the easiest ways to set up a data center you've ever seen. So we're going to see directly just how easy it is to set up. So we're going to just deploy. Notice there are different install versions. The Docker Hub Secure pool for AMD 64, because I'm going to install using Docker Desktop. I will say that the Docker Desktop installation is probably the easiest for those who are beginners for developing in cloud. If you've been working with cloud for a while, or Raspberry Pis aren't too hard to figure out as well either, because there's a ton of content out there on how to work with a Raspberry Pi, how to get Docker running on a Raspberry Pi, you will find a lot of those resources. And that brings me to a question that I have for you, Jermaine. Would you say it was hard to figure out how to run the Underground Nexus?
Not for me. It really wasn't anything complicated. Well, for me, all right, here goes one thing about me. I like to really try to understand something. So at first, if you really didn't understand Docker, and that was me when I first really messed with it, when you see the dash P and you're trying to understand what does that mean, and well, I understood TCP and UDP, but I didn't really understand what was happening in the back end. So that was like the only thing. But that's me just trying to understand even more.
Yeah,
But the installation is very simple.
that makes sense. And Jermaine makes some good points because installing it's very simple, but it is a hyperconverged data center. So once you actually have the thing up and running, it is going to have the complexities that you normally would deal with if you're doing network engineering, or if you are doing some general like cloud development. You have to think about configurations. You have to think about IP addresses and ports. All of these things matter. And so if you are just getting started with the Underground Nexus for the first time, what I'm going to recommend is you just come in here and find the right string for you among these, and you just copy this. Now, for those who are a little more advanced, or if you're troubleshooting, you can remove these items here where it says -p, that's for modifying ports, and where it says -v. You can optionally modify the string to remove those items to basically run like multiple tests with the Underground Nexus, but otherwise, just copy the whole thing. Don't make it too complicated, and then go over to the Underground Nexus location you want to install it in. In this case, I'm going to install this on a Windows device. And so on this Windows device, I just need to make sure that the clipboard is going to work for us. And then we should be able to just copy paste this in. So I'm going to copy that. Then we're just simply going to run the command, and we'll just wait for it. Now, if you have any errors or issues with this pulling, oftentimes it could be related to a DNS configuration. So if you're just testing and you want to rule out anything that might just immediately error out, could go back to, you could modify the string with the recommendations I was saying before, where you just remove certain parts of the code. You can most certainly modify the install string for those who are a little more advanced. If everything just works, great, but you can also try making sure that your DNS is configured to 8.8.8.8, whatever, 4 8s. That's basically Google. One way or another, every now and then if something's not working, then just making your DNS point to Google will help rule out if that's one of your barriers to being able to pool these resources. So that's step number 1. Now, we just simply pasted and ran some code. Now, step number 2, we have to now complete this so that it runs. So right here, we just completed install step 1, and we are now going to get into install step 2, which it says here that we need to activate the Underground Nexus, which means that we need to copy this final little string here. So we're just going to copy this. I'll just leave this on my screen for a second. So this is what we're copying right here. If you're wondering, well, what is this second thing I need to copy paste? I'm not sure. This is definitely it. So we're going to copy that, and we're just going to do the same thing. We're simply going to run this. Now, if this takes longer than 10 minutes, don't be alarmed. One of the things we will do is, even though some of this video has been edited and modified, I'm not going to edit or modify how long this takes, just so that everyone can see just how long it may or may not take. And instead, I'm going to spend some of this time to talk about, what is the Underground Nexus. We're going to talk about some of what Jermaine's been working on, and we're going to talk about some of the use cases that people tend to use with the Underground Nexus, because we will be waiting here for a little bit. It shouldn't be too terribly long. Hopefully it completes within 15 or 20 minutes, but we're going to talk about it either way, and then we're going to get into a tour of the Underground Nexus itself. So now that we've been getting this thing up and running, Jermaine, what are some of the projects that you've dabbled in, or some of the experiments that you've gone through with the Underground Nexus yourself?
For me, I've done a lot of things actually. I've done some development, like messing around with Python, um, modifying some open source code, deploying code, setting up GitLab runners. The list actually goes on. It's a lot of stuff, man.
It's pretty amazing.
Like, yeah. So I've done a lot of different things in there. Like messing with GitKraken, you know, like GitKraken for me is something that personally, like, I love, because I don't know how many people have been messing with Git commands. It's one of those things where it makes it a little bit more painless, and on top of that, it gives you a structure that you can actually see. So for me, it's something I appreciate a lot.
So many options, because and runners are fascinating. Jermaine has done things from like running various different types of scripts, trying things out with cross virtual machine, cross hardware. Jermaine's tried deploying things on top of Raspberry Pi, or even bigger servers, and using different types of hypervisors. And for the most part, Jermaine, would you say, aside from the fact that we've been in the earlier beta times of it, the product kind of changed around a bit, aside from the random, like, constant updates, how different or similar would you say the experience is using the Underground Nexus on a Raspberry Pi versus, say, like a big beefy server?
The experience doesn't really change. I would say probably the only thing that might feel different, depending on what type of Raspberry Pi you have, is the might not feel as snappy, right? If you don't have a 8 gig Pi, but if you have an 8 gig Pi, then you're perfect. But like once you go into the 4 gigs, it might feel a little bit slower. No, or not even slower. It's just the response time is not as quick. But that's about it for me. Like, but when I put on a 64 gig RAM server, like nothing changed between that and the 8 gig Pi. It felt the same.
That makes sense. And one of the reasons why that is, and Jermaine's been a part of this, is our goal was to make the Underground Nexus here an agnostic resource. And agnostic meaning, Jermaine, how would you describe agnostic? I'll say it's like making things universally compatible, but it's more than that. How would you say it, Jermaine?
No disrespect to any of the public clouds, right? Or well, to the big three. Like one thing that you see with AWS is like all the different acronyms, and like even like Kubernetes, they have their own elastic version of it. So now that means that you're using their version of code, and instead of you focusing on how Kubernetes was like independent cloud native tooling, now it's like an AWS tooling. And now because you're doing AWS tooling, how do you move that over to somewhere else? You can't use that on Google Cloud anymore because it's made for AWS. So for me, agnostic is like what I feel like the cloud native was meant to be, was agnostic, and to be used in all different environments, and making it easier for the cloud to be accepted in any environment that you're in.
Yeah.
And that's what it means to me.
And that makes a lot of sense, because it's like that whole idea. And let's kind of go over and we'll take a look at some of the diagrams here of what all is going on with the Underground Nexus, because these can look a little chaotic. But let's say that you have a whole company of remote workers and developers, because who works with a software factory? probably people who are software developers. So really, ultimately, this solution at this time is more for people who are engineers. So if someone is an engineer, this might be something that helps solve certain types of problems. But once upon a time, we had a world where people were a lot more likely to all be in an office together. And so then you go in the office and all of the servers could be connected to the same network, physical network in the same building. And they didn't have to figure out how to make those resources safely and securely accessible away from the office. Some companies are more advanced than others, of course. But now in a remote world, all of a sudden, there are developers who might be working for your company in another country, in another state. Maybe but chances are they might not be working in the same building as you, depending on what industry that you do development in and all those good things. And so one of the things that this drawing is depicting here is when we're working in remote environments, we don't have the same luxuries that we would have if we were in an office with a data center and data center resources inside of that specific office itself. And so if we're trying to work with on-site devices and we're trying to make sure that every developer has a desktop that has access to all of their very specific developer tools, that might be things that maybe they do like survey scans with, and maybe some of them do like cash register scanning and they have to get like cash register devices configured. I've worked in a lot of different industries, whether it's like preparing small scanning devices or building data center environments. I've done a wide variety, including working on like dark sites and power grids, all those different kinds of things. And people have these various devices that you have to be in the office to be part of the network so that you can connect things. So the Underground Nexus means that if everyone no longer needs the office but can still have the benefits that you got while you're working in the office, then you can basically just have your fraction of the cloud, plug in your devices. If you're trying to do like 3D printing and things like that, we actually have a couple of projects where one of our members named Jordan actually does have a configuration where there's a cloud environment that is globally accessible, that he can basically do 3D printing design and modeling with industrial control systems in different sites and locations. Basically, business environments, regardless of how remote they are or how many offices they have, can be much more unified. And then you can make your AWS work with your Azure and make your Linode work with your local computers. You can make your laptop work with your Raspberry Pi. You can do all these different things. So that's pretty much what this diagram's showing here. And a lot of what that's thanks to, if we take a deeper look into the Git BIOS here. So let's see, there's this little yellow splash that says Git BIOS engine, all inputs and outputs from edge Nexus nodes. So if we go and take a look at how does that actually work, the Git BIOS engine is designed where we use GitKraken as a UI, which we can take a look at what GitKraken kind of looks like, because it's one of the pre-installed resources in the Underground Nexus. But you can use it to manage your resources because the Underground Nexus is built out of Git. All of its source code comes from GitLab, and then it mirrors in a CI pipeline with GitHub, which then gives us access to effectively using GitLab runners and GitHub actions to manage functions, transactions, and different things across whatever is going on in your entire Underground Nexus environment, as if it's just one location once again. And then we use Portainer to help manage continuous delivery. So that's a little bit of what's going on here. And then one thing that we will also show is that Chrome RDP compatibility is built right into the Underground Nexus. So as soon as it's done getting set up and built, I'm going to show you one way to access the Underground Nexus, but then I'm going to actually show you the better way to access the Underground Nexus, because it does also free you up to where you don't have to, it goes back to, you don't want to have to be on the same network as your Underground Nexus to access things. I'm going to show you how to set it up so that you have a global server the minute you get the Underground Nexus up and running. So let's see how long our install is taking. It actually looks like it's making some pretty good progress. Looks like it's definitely still doing some things. So what I will do is, actually it is pretty close to being done. But anyways, while we're taking a look at that, we are actually going to be replacing this Quickstart guidance with this video that we're making now, because this is much more complete now that we've come much further along. So we can kind of talk a little bit about, what in the world is a software factory. So Jermaine, when you started helping build some of this stuff, did you know you were building a software factory with us? Amazing. How does it feel to have a software factory that you can just download whenever you need it? Just summon it.
It feels pretty good. It's actually pretty amazing too. Like, since it's just hosted right there in GitHub, it's not like this is something that I gotta I gotta remember some crazy URL and go there. This thing is like right there on GitHub for you to just get. And I've told a few people to actually download it and try it out. And I have a friend that is actually getting into front end programming, and he wanted something to mess around with. And I was like, hey, why don't you just try Cloud Underground? So he actually set it up about 2 weeks ago. And he was like, dude, I can't believe like everything that's already built in for him. Because that's the thing. I feel like this helps a lot of people. Even like as much as like because we're seeing the boom where it's a lot more become a software engineer,
Yeah.
get in the cloud, do something like that's on the tech side. Whether it be machine learning, it's everything. And my friend is not extremely techy. He understands a computer, but in terms of like setting up VS Code and troubleshooting things, and if something went wrong, he would definitely give me a call. And this just provided it all for him. So I think that's like one of the best parts of it, the no troubleshooting.
Yeah, that's a good point, because aside from getting Docker installed, you might have some trouble trying to figure out like what version of Docker or how to install Docker on this thing. But as soon as you have Docker installed on this thing, it just runs. As you can see, even though it might take a little bit, you don't actually have to know how to do all those configurations, because just as Jermaine was saying, it's going to configure Visual Studio Code for us. It's going to be in there. And we don't have to necessarily know how to do that. It doesn't have to be something that we care about. We just open it and we just get coding. One of the reasons why it's so hard sometimes for people to like learn development and things like that is, let's say you just want to learn code and you really don't care about the data center and you really don't care about all these other things. Well, you could hope that you go to some place where they hand you a pre-made lab that you don't have to figure out how to set up, or you could go pay for some additional labs yourself or whatever, and alternatively just go and suffer and rub your face against cement while just trying to like build a computer or configure your own things, and then all of a sudden it's like a month goes by and you've been trying to get to where you can learn the code you wanted to learn to begin with, and it's been a month and you've just been trying to get to day one. So with the Underground Nexus, it makes it easier to just get right to the code or right to your projects. And let's say that you're not necessarily like a coder and you prefer no code, you can get right to design. Honestly, one of our primary pipelines goes to a feed that just uses Canva. All of the resources in there are made in Canva. If someone has never heard of Canva, this is how technical you have to be. You can use the technical stuff. You can use something way more technical than Canva. But Canva is just one of the easier ways to be able to design things. I guess it's got all of its little things, but I guess it has an app and all these different things. So they even help you figure out how to get started with an app. You can see that there's a bunch of little drawings and things that we've made in the past, thumbnails and stuff like that. But go and see how hard Canva is to use, and if you think that Canva is too hard to use, then the Underground Nexus will be too hard to use. But if you try Canva and you're like, oh, this isn't too bad, well, then you can actually start developing. You can actually start doing things like building a website. You can actually build a WordPress website inside of one of these things and design the entire UI. So let's see if this thing's done yet. It looks like it's still going. But I do... It's funny. The last time we looked at it, it's on the same update, and that last update for this Ubuntu update is the longest update, and then it's going to be done very soon here. So, Jermaine, have you ever used Canva before?
Yeah, I used it way back for like when I was first getting into marketing. It was like my main tool because I have no till this day I have no patience to learn how to use Photoshop. So Canva for me is just like painless. It's perfect.
Yeah, Canva's great for that. Like Photoshop, that's actually what got me using Canva too. Is I was like, Photoshop. I don't really want to use Photoshop. It's not my favorite thing. And there's Canva. It's really easy to use. Now, if you're using a Raspberry Pi, for those who are trying to learn code to do the stuff that you're doing, the Raspberry Pi does actually have some like built-in labs and lessons. And so a Raspberry Pi is pre-built with labs on a number of things, including like being able to build your own games with Python as a way to learn Python, and then you reward for completing coding the game. Now it's a template. You don't have to be hardcore. It's made for like middle school and up. So if you are at least in middle school and up, and if you're in my audience, you are, then you can use a Raspberry Pi to learn Python. And then afterwards, you can enjoy playing the game or trying it out anyways if you're not the gaming type. Now, the Underground Nexus has completed. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Now that the Underground Nexus is here, how do we access it? The first way to access the Underground Nexus is to just go over to your browser once it's done doing all of this, whatever it's doing, everything, which is a lot of things. We're just going to open up our browser here, and notice that I have this thing called Chrome Remote Desktop. This is what I would recommend using to access your Underground Nexus with. But before we use this, I'm going to instead show you how to access it without installing Chrome RDP right away. We're just going to type localhost and then 1000. And there you have it. This is the Underground Nexus. I will also strongly urge you to change your password. And once your password's changed, probably also don't change your password. Change the default password. The default password on this is, and I'll just type it right here, Nosha.1. I'm pretty sure it's inside of something that I wrote somewhere. Or is it? Actually, no. The default password is just ABC. The default password is ABC. There's another resource where the default password is Nosha.1. That's one of the ones that we use a lot. But just know that the default password is ABC here for logging into things and when you're doing stuff, because it's going to ask for the password. Now, this is a nice desktop and all, but I'm going to show you the better way to access the Underground Nexus, or at least my preferred way of accessing it. And once you change your password, it's also more secure. And using this login method makes it so that you can access your Underground Nexus without being on the same network as it from any device, even your phone. So with this, if you were to try to like go off of your Wi-Fi with your phone and try to access this thing, it's not going to go and access this link here. It's not going to work. You have to be on the same network. But if you're on the same Wi-Fi, then you can then access your Underground Nexus on your phone or on a different laptop or a Raspberry Pi, just on a different device. But Chrome RDP, if we go over to where it says access my computer here, the Underground Nexus allows you to install Chrome RDP via SSH. It does have its own standalone app if you don't like Chrome, so you don't actually have to have Chrome. You can actually just install the app, so you can go to this website from any browser. It doesn't have to be Chrome. It could be Brave browser, it could be Edge, it doesn't matter. It could be Safari. And you're just going to select this, and we're going to say begin. I've already set up the computer. That's the Underground Nexus. The Underground Nexus is already set up. You don't have to know how to install this. That part you don't have to know. So ignore that and hit next. Then it's going to say set up another computer. We're going to say authorize. Once we authorize one of these strings, we need to choose this Debian Linux string. That's the one that we need to choose here. And then we can go ahead and copy that to clipboard. And we are going to want to go to, notice my URL, you're going to type this. In the guidance here for how to use the Underground Nexus in GitHub, it gives us this URL for HTTPS local hub 9050. This is the first place that we want to go to get configured for Chrome RDP. So we're going to go over here, and it's going to take us to Portainer for the first time. Going to go ahead and passwords must be. All right, password has to be a certain length. And once we're logged in, we are finally inside of the Underground Nexus, and we can say get started. And once we select get started, it has this option for local right here, which I'll continue clicking through these. And on the left hand side, these options are the same. If we select containers or containers here, you'll notice that it'll highlight this if you click it from the center here and look for workbench. We want to go to our workbench, and we're going to select this caret. So I'll go back so you can see that again. So to get to that menu that I was at, I was on the containers page. I went to workbench here, and under quick actions, there's this caret with an underscore that says exec code. So we're going to choose this, and we are going to simply connect to it, and we will now take our code and paste it here for, so it's going to give you an error if you just paste this in, so you actually need to first type su space -abc, and that's going to log you into a user, because Chrome RDP, if you get this error, this is what you have to do. So if you get this error right here with Chrome RDP, pay a lot of attention to this. You have to type this in, and then you can paste your string, and it should work. So it's going to ask for a pin. And that's a pin that you make up. You set that pin up. That's your pin. You made that pin up. Now it's going to go ahead, and ideally it should say host ready to receive connections. Ignore whatever else it's saying and just look for host ready to receive connections. And now you have a globally accessible setup where I can say, let's just go back to remote access and refresh this page. Make sure that you refresh the page, or it's not going to know that there's something new here. And now we have a much nicer way to access our Underground Nexus globally. We don't have to be on the same network. You do need to type in your PIN though. So we're going to let that load, and the first thing you will get here is some stuff. I'm just going to minimize that for now. Well, it is asking if we want our clipboard. We do want the clipboard. I'm just going to say allow. You don't necessarily need the clipboard, but I want the clipboard. And make sure that you select where it says mate. If you select open box, then you get a black presentation screen, so you can do that as well. But if you don't choose mate, you don't get the desktop. So if you go and you say OK and you have just a black screen, then you must have chosen open box. Keep that in mind. Open box, just a black screen. It will let you launch items with the right click menu. So if you're using open box and you right click, we're not going to do that today, but that's how you get a browser open or find your menus. Right click is your friend in open box. With mate, we're just going to say OK, and we're going to get our conventional desktop, and oh, does it load so much faster than our other way of accessing the Underground Nexus. And I can access it from anywhere, and it's also secure. It actually creates what's called a VXLAN tunnel that goes all the way across the web and the internets if you are not local to the device, to securely give you access without having, say, like RDP ports open to the World Wide Web for everyone to see your datas, all that good stuff. Don't expose your datas. And the most exciting thing is if we click on Firefox here, you're ready to begin hacking satellites. Amazing. So if you want to get an idea of, what do people do with these skills, like who would use this thing, or why would someone do anything with this, or what kind of jobs would people, well, here's your job right now. You can just get started right away, because we need to have more secure satellites in the world, and the only way to know how to make satellites more secure, and we focus on DevSecOps, is to make sure that your development process is secure before satellites get launched off into orbit. And so you get to learn how to make satellites secure by hacking them. Now, it does have the actual little interactive experience here. That's something that you don't need the Underground Nexus to do and work on. But there actually is a lot more to this, where if you go to the option that says Learn here under Hackasat, it has all these things that say all about Hackasat, and then it also has Learn More and all these other things. If you select the option to learn more, it actually has a lot of infrastructure that you can deploy inside the Underground Nexus itself. You can come in here, it has Docker resources, and the Underground Nexus has Docker built into it already running in there. So where this is talking about Docker this, Docker that, and it's talking about like Packer Builder ARM, and some of these other things, Open Sat Kit. This is all code resources that you can go and dig through all of this. You can actually emulate. You'll have to do some emulation here in order to make this work. But the Underground Nexus, fortunately, is here to be your friend with this handy-dandy virtual machine manager. And this virtual machine manager is going to be how you can emulate your satellite hardware, or whatever hardware you want. But we chose Hackasat because if you're going to learn how to start emulating virtual machines or emulating hardware, well then it's a lesson that is normally really boring unless it's something really cool like emulating satellites. It's the same amount of time to learn how to emulate something, but why not just emulate something extra cool? So if we open the virtual machine manager and say File, we can say Add Connection is the first thing we want, and we want to choose the QEMU KVM user session most specifically. We're going to select that, and we are going to say Connect. And if you choose the other options, this isn't going to work, so you can go back and look over or pause it, however have you, to take a look at how I just got this configured. But there it is. That's what it's going to look like. And then you can begin to do things like add new virtual machines, even if the virtual machine is not the same architecture as your host operating system. And this right here most certainly will run on a Raspberry Pi, but it's not actually going to run on something that's an AMD 64 system. And so that's the beginning of the puzzle of the Underground Nexus, is learning how to emulate hardware that really shouldn't even necessarily be possible to run on the platform or hardware that you're actually using. Because the Underground Nexus can do that. That's why we built it. It's a copy-paste data center. I don't like limits. I don't believe in limits. So we're not going to limit what kind of stuff that we can support if possible. And that's what agnostic is. Jermaine, what are your thoughts about these things like emulating satellites and all this crazy stuff? Did you know you can emulate a satellite?
I did not know you can emulate a satellite. Like, now it looks like I'm gonna have to dig a little bit deeper into this hackaset. I do find it interesting, but I have so many things that I'm interested in learning that this is a nerd thing to add to the list.
It's like code central to the face. It's like this goes so deep that if you know this stuff, you can get a job. Trust me.
Oh, no,
If you're like
definitely
doing this stuff, and because some people be like, "Oh, I don't know enough," but anyone who knows this stuff, trust me, you know enough. You know more than enough to get almost any really technical job. So there's your sandbox. It is hardcore, but it's also free, and there's no time limit on it. So I guess that brings us to, let's do a lightweight tour, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And Jermaine and I will be back soon. We'll probably be ramping up to a more monthly basis for dropping some of these more, I guess, involving videos where we're really kind of getting into what's going on here. If we want to know how to use the Underground Nexus, if we go back over to the Underground Nexus's, we have the little tab for the Cloud Underground here. The download section for the Underground Nexus has all of the links for how we can actually use and interact with things in the Underground Nexus. So if I scroll down here, we have all these instructions and guidance on like how can you access whatever you're trying to access. And we are going to go down to section 9. Now, you don't really have to use section 10 unless you're using the development deployment. So notice that this in bold very specifically outlines development. If you did not choose the copy paste that uses the development ports, then these ports are not going to successfully work. Now this one's going to work. Well, actually, yeah, they're not going to work if you didn't open the port. So I'll just show you. If 9050 is open because we have Portainer here, and so localhost 9050 works. But if we try to do localhost 9010, it will probably fail. Unless you're inside the Underground Nexus. So what I'm showing you here is the Underground Nexus has a firewall. And it even says, checking the proxy and the firewall. Yes, the Underground Nexus has a firewall pre-built right into it. And depending on how you deploy the Underground Nexus, that actually manages the configuration of your firewall. I haven't really made a lot of information around that. It's one of those things that we just kind of configure by default for folks. But for anyone who really wants to get into that, that's the sort of thing that you join the DevSecOps Dojo to get deeper into. So if you're really into this stuff and you're like, whoa, I want to do these things. I want to host other people remotely. I want to know how to configure the firewall so that these ports down here work, join the DevSecOps Dojo. Also, another thing to note is that Terraform is pre-installed in here before I kind of go over some of those other links. But let's take a look. If you want to see Terraform, we have Terraform. Terraform comes pre-installed. But Terraform is installed. That's the important part. Terraform, everybody. Anyways, why Terraform? Terraform lets you slingshot servers. And so if you have a copy-paste data center that can't copy-paste more servers, that's tricky. So Terraform lets you make your own custom servers to copy-paste all over, wherever you want. And then we have step 9. Let's just focus on step 9 and do a high-level tour. Step 9 shows us that we have access to all of our resources. Notice that the IP addresses don't say localhost or anything like that. But I can actually, from inside of this on step 9, just from inside the Underground Nexus itself, once again, step 10 isn't going to work from inside of the Underground Nexus. Keep that in mind. So if you're using step 10 and you're saying that the things in step 10 don't work from inside the Underground Nexus, that's true. These work from inside the Underground Nexus. It says the links below can be used from inside the Underground Nexus desktop. Access the GitHub URL from inside the Firefox browser. So it's very specific about that. Just pay attention to that. So then we have Pi-hole, we have the CyberLife Torpedo, we have another desktop. I'm just going to open up all these tabs and we can take a look. We even have Visual Studio Code, a browser accessible web app. So this is Visual Studio Code that you can actually share and host to other people. And you can duplicate that and host multiple people with Visual Studio Code if you want to. And then notice we also have, I mentioned GitKraken in the past. If we launch GitKraken, it does what GitKraken does. It just launches. That's GitKraken. It lets us kind of choose what service we're working with and get started right away. The nice thing about GitKraken is you can unite GitHub with GitLab, with Bitbucket, with whatever you're trying to unite it with, and then set up your authentication. It does configure with Google as a configuration OAuth option. You can also use GitHub for OAuth and GitLab, some of these other resources. So I'll close GitKraken and you can take a look at that for yourself. GitHub Desktop works even if you don't have GitHub. So if you're just trying to do some things, you can come in here and say welcome to GitHub Desktop, and you can skip this step here and set up a user. And we can just go ahead and say finish here. And we can build repositories in the Underground Nexus even without GitHub. We don't have to go onto github.com to start building repositories, all those good things, but we can clone from the internet if we want to, optionally. Or we can go and create repositories here and then send those repositories up to GitHub. So you can start engineering your Git right away. To make that easy and straightforward, it's for people who are DevOps engineers, all that good stuff, if you're using those tools and resources. Visual Studio Code is actively installed on here as well. So the web browser accessible version on this little step 9 in the background here where we have Visual Studio, that's not the only version of Visual Studio available in here. It's just Visual Studio Code as you would expect it to be. So if we go then and to take a look at these tabs that we have here, if we go over to this one, this is Portainer. You can go ahead and say accept the risk because these are services that live inside of the Underground Nexus firewall. Notice that this is Portainer. You can access it from inside of the Underground Nexus. It's the same thing that you logged into to set up Chrome RDP in the first place if you're using Chrome RDP. So if you then log in, you'll notice that of all the things in here, we might not be able to access everything outside of the Underground Nexus, but we can access, so I'll just kind of shrink this a little bit so you can see that we have different tabs up here. But like if we go and try to take a look at like localhost 9010, that's what's being blocked by the firewall. Meanwhile, if we go and take a look at what's behind that firewall, we have Minio. The login information is in GitHub, so read GitHub if you want the user login. It's minio admin, log into that. You can change the password. I would recommend changing the password if you're using this for production. Once you are inside of Minio, this is where you can engineer IAM and your data management. You can make anything a NAS by opening this port, so that can be something that you make accessible outside of the Underground Nexus, and you can use that to share data to and from the Underground Nexus or with other individuals. And you can also make S3 clusters or Minio clusters to expand your data resources and basically share data with other individuals or scale your volumes to other Underground Nexus devices. So the Underground Nexus is designed with scale in mind. So by default, it is built for clustering, which includes having a way to manage your data in clusters. So we do have the Pi-hole installed in the Underground Nexus. It manages the DNS for every single default service that runs inside of here. Notice that it says that there are 6 clients. You take a look at this. There are a few things that aren't necessarily running through it the same way as others. But we have everything from Kubernetes here to our torpedo is the S3 bucket with Minio. Notice it says Minio here, it says Minio here. These are our services that we are protecting, monitoring, and the Pi-hole is what monitors those. If you want to log into the Pi-hole, it will tell you a bunch of things, and if you try to log in, you probably don't have the password. So select forgot password. And if you select that you forgot your password, then you can come over here and copy that forgotten password, or at least this little string, and go back to Portainer. So similarly to how we set up Chrome RDP, we can actually go and modify the inner DNS control, aka the Pi-hole here. We can modify that with the quick actions in the exec console. And just like before, we can just paste things into this, and suddenly it's going to ask for a password. Once we have a password set up, then we are going to be able to log into Pi-hole. So once you are logged into the Pi-hole, you can also use Firefox as a password vault. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So the Underground Nexus makes a great location for using your private data. You can set up a Firefox account to better manage your password vault, and they have some quite decent services that come in here. So you can begin to save your passwords as you enter them in for things so that you can keep track of passwords as you're modifying your passwords. There is another desktop at this 10.20.01. This is a Security Operations Center dashboard that we've added in here. The default password is ABC, the same as the user. And when we get in here, this is indeed another desktop inside of our desktop, but it is also not Ubuntu. This is called KDE Alpine Linux. This is a different operating system because if someone is injecting code into the other core components of the Underground Nexus, they will be stopped here, and this is an analysis space, and so it gives you time to figure out, like, if there's an attack, at least an attack that's impacting the rest of the structure is potentially not going to also impact this side of your structure. And this is where you can come and set up things like desktops that you share with other individuals. So you can share this desktop with folks. You can set up continuous 24/7 things here. So for example, if you have ever taken a look at my YouTube channel, you may or may not notice that we have this 24/7 stream running here. And this 24/7 stream actually runs 100% from that Security Operations Center dashboard, so you can actually broadcast whatever SOC you build from there. So this is a SOC running from this desktop here inside of the Underground Nexus, the Security Operations Center desktop right here. So that one would be, when you're looking here, it says Ubuntu KDE Security Operations Center desktop. That is the same as, just as I was showing this, which is capable of producing things like this once again. So that gets the point across. Vault is for managing secrets across your environment, whether it's associated with GitHub or you're trying to manage tokenization. So I don't remember what the login for that is. It's probably written down right here. Vault, my root. Default password for Vault is my root. That's going to get us logged in. We can start working with secrets management. This is for building large-scale deployments. Chances are you're using tools like Terraform. If you're using tools like HashiCorp Vault, if you are working with monolithic builds, this might not be something that you ever care about. But if you're working with things like Kubernetes, you might care about this. And if we come over to this, this is different from the Visual Studio Code that lives here. This Visual Studio Code is an install application that is just local to this environment. Alternatively, this Visual Studio Code, you can open up a port in the firewall and send it to have collaborators be able to use Visual Studio Code with you, and you can spin up multiples of these. And so let's say that you have the Underground Nexus, and let's say that you have 5 developers, and you want to just manage Visual Studio Code for all 5 developers with one fail effort. You can have all 5 developers fully managed with Chrome RDP from one device that lives wherever you want it to live, and all of them have their own Visual Studio Code right here that you manage and make sure it has the things that they need for their Visual Studio Code. IT made easy, IT management made easy, managing your applications, getting the right default applications for your developers pre-staged so that your developers don't, kind of like what Jermaine was saying earlier. Jermaine, how does it feel to not have to go back and reconfigure these every single time, like your kind of original introduction to this that was very manual? How does it compare?
It's changed a lot. Because, yeah, there was a lot of once you got it set up, then we had to go through the setup process individually for everything. And now it's, I think you have everything automated. Probably the only thing that isn't automated, can't be automated, is the RDP setup.
Yep.
But, yeah, like everything else is automated now.
It's exactly right. And Jermaine's right about the Chrome RDP thing. For anyone who's like, oh, well, why isn't that automated though? Because that string has to be specific to you. So when you're pasting that in, that other people aren't getting your strings. And then you're putting in your PIN when you set up Chrome RDP, and you don't want your users to tell you their PIN. The PIN that you use, don't share it. The PIN that your people use, don't let them share their PINs. And for people who share those PINs, shame on you. Security first, but you can't tell people how to be secure if they don't want security. That's the thing. And then that covers all of the default items that are installed inside of the Underground Nexus, which brings us to one thing that I haven't talked a whole lot about, which is KuberNexus and the Nexus Zero, which we'll make another video just about the Nexus Zero, because I keep talking about this whole thing of like hosting other developers. You haven't even seen the half, because it's even easier to host other developers with their own desktops from the Underground Nexus than, you can give them entire Kubernetes scaled desktops with all of the fault tolerance and benefits and integration options with resources like etcd and so on. If we take a look at this one thing over here that says, actually it's probably really easy to set up because it's the same sort of thing, but we can do this a different, we'll make a KuberNexus or a Nexus 0 video later. But right here we have K3D KuberNexus. This is Kubernetes, and there's a little server in here. This is a server load balancer, but server 0, you can go in and connect to server 0. Let's see. So just if anyone's having trouble connecting and it's like exiting out of this and it's like you're trying to open it, it's like no you don't, and it closes it all the time, you can change this drop down and choose SH and say connect, and then you can type kubectl get info or so kubectl, I guess you can just say help, and then that's basically Kubernetes right there. Not basically, this is Kubernetes. This is Kubernetes, and it works like Kubernetes, it acts like Kubernetes, it operates like Kubernetes. And for anyone who's interested in setting up like scalable desktops for additional users, and you're like, well, let me set up more desktops that other users can come in and I can help them get their remote web top set up, then we have this right here where it says Underground Ops with, it has a little guide in here actually under the Nexus 0. Once again, I had clicked on where it says Nexus 0. It's at the top here. We have Underground Nexus. Scrolling down slightly, Nexus 0. In this, there will be better guidance on this one day, but it tells us that it is a copy-paste cloud-native server node. So this is how you add additional servers to your data center, and it's like sliding in a new server into your server rack. That then allows you to build a collaborative space where you can set up multiple developer webtops in there, and then all of those individuals who have webtops in the same Kubernetes cluster can actually show, collaborate in there where there are separate desktops. It's I'll have to make a whole video, and that's pretty neat. And it has adaptive desktops and some interesting stuff that goes in there. And it also tells you what you need to do to get to the point to where you're setting up the Chrome RDP. So you can go through that yourself for now, or wait till we have some of those videos. And then you can begin deploying additional servers for additional collaborators and developers. Since it is a software factory after all, you gotta have a place for the workers in the factory. That makes no sense to have a factory and no place for your workers. Jermaine has actually been able to spend a little bit of time on the prototyping of the Nexus 0, and I guess we'll kind of close with the last thoughts. Jermaine, what are your thoughts on some of the prototype work with playing with Kubernetes, since it's a little different from Docker? How would you say it's felt work going from Docker to deploying things in Kubernetes from Docker? How did you feel about that process?
At first, it was a headache. Kubernetes is a whole nother, like when you start with Docker, all right, this is a lot, and you're trying to process the idea of containers. And then once you figure out Docker, you're like, oh, this is great. This is the greatest thing ever made.
Yeah.
then get into Kubernetes, and it starts all over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you realize, like, okay, now, like, containerization is great. And let me say this, like, I love Kubernetes, but I realize one thing about Kubernetes. It has its use cases. Like you see in what you're doing with it, where it's used to scale out and set up more environments, is how it's properly used. I see a lot of, like, now I'm starting to look at it, and this is where the Nexus helped me a lot. I realize that there's people that set up Kubernetes and they have no reason for Kubernetes. It's just because everybody says Kubernetes.
Sure.
And
yeah.
you need it. But you don't know why you have it. But when you're talking about I need to scale something out, and it's more so like you're scaling. I guess this is more vertical than horizontal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're scaling like this, you want to use something like Kubernetes, and let's say somebody leaves, it's not a problem for you to just tear it down,
Yeah.
and that data is not lost either, which is one of the great things about containers and the way that storage works in there. So it's to me, it's like one of the better ways of, at least in this environment, it's the best way to handle scaling.
Sure, totally, yeah. And Jermaine made some good things, some good points. It makes a lot of good points all the time, but some points that I want to outline specifically here are it is a thing that I've run into environments where they have no real need for Kubernetes and they just have like one like server, big server, and then they're just like, well, I guess we just everyone says use Kubernetes, so I guess we'll just deploy Kubernetes on this one big server. Well, at that point, Kubernetes is really complicated compared to Docker. One of the reasons why we have Docker as the core foundation is Docker, it scales too and it orchestrates too, but it in a lot of ways is easier to use in a single environment space and maybe not quite as convenient when the goal is to like do maximum scale. But then that's why you can use Kubernetes and Docker together where Docker solves the problem of like, well, let me just get going and start with whatever I have now. But then you're like, oh, well, how am I going to scale without it being a lot more work? You could, A, just stick to Docker exclusively and not start using Kubernetes and all those things. Or you could, B, use Docker as a stage to scale with Kubernetes. And that is what the Underground Nexus does. And so you can start with as small as a Raspberry Pi. And just as Jermaine was talking about, let's say that you did end up doing a whole bunch of scaling and stuff like that, and then there's an environment where like some things happen or whatever, and maybe a project was even temporary and you had to have a whole bunch of like cluster development resources for this temporary project, and then the temporary project was complete and the developer, maybe it was like a 6-month contract and it's like, hey, maybe we'll come back and do some more work later, but for now, project's done. Salute everyone, great work, great stuff. And now you don't want to be paying for all of these resources that you don't need when maybe those developers won't be needed again for like 10 months or a year even. So now you can just take your Kubernetes and that whole development environment and just spin it down. Just turn it off. Turn it on when the developers are there. Turn it off when they're gone. And all from a Raspberry Pi. You can just have nothing but just a Raspberry Pi, maybe a couple of Raspberry Pis. And then when you start bringing more help, scale to DigitalOcean, scale to Civo or something like that, or what, I don't know, Linode. It doesn't really matter. You decide where you want to scale to, and then boom, you can just support however many people, whoever you're trying to support. There you go. So I guess that kind of wraps up what we're doing today. And
Just want to say something
yeah,
on that though, Nato. Like what's very important to take away from all this is the fact that like you can have a developer on a Chromebook. Right? You like that's how insane this is, right? Like your developer doesn't need to have a beefy machine because you're providing that through your resources.
very true. Yeah.
Like, and that's the best way for me. Like that's the way I digest it, and I realize like that's insane. When I
True.
can have a server that can host 20 users, 10, whatever, and like you said, I can scale up to another environment. Like I run out of hardware, the node has more hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to go buy another server, and
Yeah.
I can just get that from somewhere else. And when I don't need it anymore, I just close it out, and it's done.
True.
That to me is one of the best parts. Realizing that I don't have to buy more hardware, ship it out to an employee that might not stay with me, or like you said, it's just a contractor.
Yeah.
All I
a
can
hundred
do is
percent.
just pick up a laptop, send it to them, and we're done.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And like so that's huge. huge thing to outline, Jermaine, because Jermaine's right. If you're a business owner and you're sitting here trying to make decisions on who you're going to work with and all these different things, if people don't have their own development resources, as the business owner, you're responsible for funding it. And sometimes funding people's development resources can be expensive and painful. And then what's also expensive and painful is if you have developers who can't really quite do their job, and maybe something could have taken a week, but now it's taking maybe 3 months versus a week, all because people didn't have the resources or infrastructure that they needed. And so you're also now spending time, not just money on infrastructure and other things, or just it's complicated otherwise. But the Underground Nexus lets you just, be like, oh, doesn't matter what device, bring your own device, bring whatever device you want, because you can then just, as long as they can use a web browser, they've got a web browser, they can use Chrome RDP and boop, just like connect up to whatever environment you hand them. You just be like, here's an environment, go for it, and it just works. So it's powerful stuff. So, all right, I guess we'll go ahead. And Jermaine, do you have any other wisdom bombs to drop before we wrap up this session?
I mean, it just overall, like when you think about development, when you think about security, the more it's like the more you look at security on a whole, you realize it's a lot like what we always talk about first principle. Like, where does security really start? It starts at development, any way you look at it. Like, Windows operating system, whatever operating system you're on, that has to be developed in a secure place before it can actually be given to the general public, right? And the more we focus on starting at the core, securing the environment that you're in, and making sure that like the chance of something being leaked or your source code just being out in the wild is lowered, and possibly like an employee going to some website that has malware and now it's going rampant throughout your whole environment. Now you don't really have to, like, the goal is to prevent those things from happening. And that's where I look at the power of Nexus. That's where I feel like this is the future, because we need more emphasis on the start and not the finish. Like,
Totally.
That's how I look at security now.
That makes sense. So, yeah, thank you for helping teach the people the ways, Jermaine, and joining us here, taking time out of your day. And for everyone who is checking out the Underground Nexus, feel free, if you're trying to get some support or ask questions, you can join the DevSecOps Dojo. It's at cloudunderground.dev. The DevSecOps Dojo to join, once you check out our DevSecOps Dojo link, this is free, and this is the place where you can come and ask us questions. You do need to sign up for this, and so once you've signed up for the DevSecOps Dojo and you get approved to join, then you can go ahead and you'll get added to our Discord community, which you will get a boost from our AI friend, AI Augustus. So that's how you can get assistance on doing these things if you don't want to do it alone. Otherwise, if you prefer to do it alone, you absolutely can. This is one of those things that's fully self-service. It's just some open source code. You can even do it just watching videos with us. So thank you everyone who has taken the time to check out the Underground Nexus, and we will be back with more soon enough.